Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of WN Movie Talk Podcast, your ultimate destination for in-depth discussions about the world of cinema. I am your host Trev, and today we are diving into the glamorous, dangerous and ever-evolving world of James Bond, 007, License to Kill. And this is going to be a deep dive too. From the books to the movies, Bond has become a staple on the big screen and in our culture. Whether you know him as 007, Commander Bond, or simply as Bond, James Bond. This legendary character has been captivating audiences for over 7 decades, both in print and on the silver screen. It all started back in 1953 when Ian Fleming introduced us to the suave and deadly secret agent. In his novel, Casino Royale, Fleming's creation was a man of many talents, sophisticated, ruthless, and ever so charming. Bond quickly captured the imaginations of readers with his daring missions, high-stakes gambling, and unflinching demeanour. But the road from book to blockbuster was anything but smooth. Fleming had dreams of seeing Bond in action on the big screen from as early as the release of Casino Royale, but early attempts faltered. The first adaptation of Casino Royale was an American TV special from 1954 featuring Barry Nelson as an Americanized Jimmy Bond. It was an ill-fated attempt that almost sank the franchise before it had a chance to take off. It would be almost 10 years later that producers Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman would bring Bond to a global audiences, launching their production company Eon Pictures and striking gold with Dr. No in 1962, introducing us to the quintessential Bond, Sean Connery. And from that moment, the legacy of James Bond was practically cemented, and the world of espionage thrillers was never the same again. Bond's world is rich with iconic elements, the slick Walther PPK, the sinister villains with grandiose lairs and ingenious gadgets, courtesy of Q Branch, and who can forget the deadly yet captivating adversaries like Goldfinger and Hugo Drax, or the exotic locations that serve as the backdrop for Bond's adventures. And then there are the Bond girls, each one more glamorous than the last, adding both allure and complexity to Bond's life. The Bond series has evolved significantly since its inception in 1962, as has the character of Bond. The franchise has seen numerous actors don the tuxedo and utter that immortal introduction, and each actor and indeed each movie has shown slight alterations from one to the next, reflecting changes in society, cinema, and the vision of each actor and production team. From the light-hearted approach taken by Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan to the gritty realism of Daniel Craig, each actor has brought something unique to the role. Even the slight misjudged entries from George Lazenby and Timothy Dalton have gone on to earn themselves support with their own take on the coveted role. Sean Connery was the first actor to portray Bond, debuting in Dr. No, 1962. Before his tenure as Bond, Connery had a varied career, including working as a milkman, lifeguard and bodybuilder. He acted in a number of smaller roles in British films and TV series. Connery starred as Bond a total of 6 times. Officially 6, but actually 7 in total, playing the character for over 20 years. However, this tenure was broken up, and his final performance, well, it didn't really count. Connery appeared in Dr. No, 1962, From Russia Is Love, 1963, Goldfinger, 1964, You Thunderball, 1965, You Only Live Twice, 1967, and then after a break of one film, in which he handed George Lazenby the tuxedo and the PPK, he returned for one more outing with Diamonds Are Forever. Then, over a decade later, and as a bit of a kick in the nuts to his old producers, he would return to the role one more time in Never Say Never Again, the controversial, unofficial Bond, which went head-to-head with Roger Moore's current outing, Octopussy, part of an ongoing dispute which was set in motion decades earlier with Fleming and his quest to bring Bond to the big screen. But we will discuss this in more depth as the series progresses. Connery's Bond was suave, charismatic and occasionally brutal. His portrayal laid the groundwork for the cinematic Bond, emphasising sophistication, wit and ruthless efficiency, and yet his portrayal was also evolved over the course of his subsequent movies. In Dr. No, Connery set the template for the character. Suave, confident, ruthless, this Bond was a womanizer with a taste for luxury, aligning closely with Ian Fleming's creation. Connery's Bond was sophisticated yet lethal, a Cold War era spy facing exotic villains. From Russia with Love, 1963, and Goldfinger, 1964, solidified Bond's persona with more gadgets and memorable villains. The balance of charm and brutality became more pronounced, and then the winning formula for the Bond films was firmly established. Exotic locations, beautiful women, larger-than-life antagonists with despicable ambitions and elaborate hideouts. Thunderball, 1965, and You Only Live Twice, 1967, continued to build on the spectacle with underwater battles and a hollowed-out volcano base. Connery's portrayal began to show a more relaxed and humorous side, reflecting a growing confidence in the character. Diamonds Are Forever saw Connery return after a brief hiatus, with a more playful and less intense Bond, reflecting the shifting attitudes of the early 70s and a move towards a more light-hearted approach. George Lazenby was the second actor to bring Bond to the screen. Lazenby was an Australian model with limited acting experience before being cast as Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He'd done a few commercials before landing the role, but that was as far as his acting went. Lazenby's portrayal was closer to Fleming's Bond in that he was vulnerable, romantic, particularly in his relationship with Tracy DiVincenzo, who he marries, and yet, despite a strong performance from this absolute noob, it remains, of course, far less polished than Connery's version. Lazenby's tenure was short-lived due to his decision to leave the role after just one film, which led to discussions as to the stability and the future of the series. Roger Moore, the third actor to slip into the tux, brought a solid stint that would help carry Bond through the 70s and into the 80s. He had a successful television career before becoming Bond, notably starring in The Saint as Simon Templar. Moore's Bond, beginning with Live and Let Die in 1973, was more light-hearted and humorous compared to his predecessors. He brought a suave, debonair charm to the role, often relying on wit and clever gadgets. Moore played the secret agent 7 times, and all under the Eon banner, so he officially tops Connery's tenure. He would go on to star in Live and Let Die, 1973, The Man with the Golden Gun, 1974, Spy Who Loved Me, 1977, Moonraker, 1979, For Your Eyes Only, 1981, Octopussy, 1983, and A View to a Kill, 1985. Live and Let Die marked the start of his tenure, introducing a lighter, more humorous Bond. Moore's Bond was less intense and more of a gentleman, reflecting the changing tastes of the 70s. His films often included more fantastical elements and a larger sense of fun. The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker epitomised the extravagance of Moore's era, with outlandish plots and larger-than-life villains. Bond's character was charming and witty, and often using humour to diffuse the tension. For Your Eyes Only, 1981, attempted to ground the series with a more serious tone and reduce reliance on gadgets. Moore's Bond here was more introspective, dealing with personal loss and showcasing a grittier side. A View to a Kill, 1985, was Moore's final film and saw an older, more reflective Bond, still retaining his charm but facing the realities of age. The film mixed Moore's light-hearted style with darker themes, preparing for a transition to a new Bond era. Moore had by this point achieved the most Bond films under his belt, and with an unbroken 12-year tenure, he was also the longest reigning Bond. Timothy Dalton was Bond number 4. Dalton was a classically trained actor with a strong background in theatre, particularly with the Royal Shakespeare Company, before taking on the role of Bond. His portrayal was a departure from Moore's light-hearted take, offering grittier, more intense Bond that aligned closely with Fleming's original character. Dalton's Bond was serious, brooding and complex, reflecting the darker tone of the novels. He made only 2 movies, which reflected the audience's difficulty in adjusting from Moore's distinctly more family-friendly portrayal. In The Living Daylights, Dalton aimed to bring the character closer to Fleming's original vision. a tough professional spy with a sense of duty and moral complexity. The film addressed contemporary Cold War tensions, reflecting a more realistic and less fantastical approach. And in Fleming's own words, Bond was made for grown-ups, not for schoolboys. Licence to Kill in 1989 furthered this gritty portrayal, with Bond on a personal vendetta. This film was notably violent and dealt with mature themes like drug trafficking, showing a Bond who was emotionally driven and ruthless. Dalton's Bond far less reliant on gadgets and more on his wits and his physicality. In the mid-90s, Pierce Brosnan was announced to be the fifth actor to play Bond. Brosnan was well known for his role in the TV series Remington Steele before becoming Bond, but had been an actor since the 70s. He almost became Bond in The Living Daylights, but when Remington Steele was recommissioned, he became unavailable and the role offered to Dalton. He starred in a total of 4 films. The Cold War was over and GoldenEye in 1995 relaunched Bond into this new era. Brosnan balanced the charm and humour of Moore with the intensity of Dalton, creating a modern, sophisticated spy with a blend of action and character depth that appealed to 1990s audiences. The film addresses post-Cold War realities and introduced a more tech-savvy Bond. Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997, and The World Is Not Enough, 1999, continue to blend traditional Bond elements with contemporary themes like media manipulation and corporate greed. Brosnan's portrayal maintained a balance between the suave demeanour and a willingness to engage in intense action sequences. Die Another Day, 2002, leaned heavily into high-tech gadgets and over-the-top action, reflecting early 2000s blockbuster trends. Brosnan's Bond was confident and resourceful, navigating a plot that mixed espionage with sci-fi elements, but ultimately this incarnation would buckle under the weight of a post-9/11 world where the stakes were far more evident and tongue-in-cheek action, like kite surfing a tsunami, no longer sat well. In the words of Barbara Broccoli, one of the producers of the Bond films, it didn't seem right to have a flippancy to the movies at that point. When in doubt of which direction to take the movies, the producers would go back to the books, and they did just that. Book 1, to be more precise. Having recently acquired the rights to Fleming's debut, Casino Royale, they could finally relaunch the character from the very start of his career, wiping the slate clean and re-sculpting Bond once again, adapting to the times to give the character and films a whole new relevance for the noughties. Daniel Craig was perfect to bring this radical change to the character. Craig's Bond is a rugged, muscular and deeply emotion portrayal, often described as a blunt instrument, a return to Fleming's original depiction as a hard-edged, troubled spy. For Bond, Craig had a diverse acting career, with notable performances in films like Layer Cake and Munich. His tenure as 007 saw him star in 5 films: Casino Royale, 2006, Quantum of Solace, 2008, Skyfall, 2012, Spectre, 2015, and No Time to Die, 2021. A massive 16-year tenure that dethroned Moore's accomplishment. Casino Royale, 2006, rebooted the series with Daniel Craig portraying Bond's early career. Craig's Bond was raw, emotional, physically imposing, reflecting a back-to-basics approach. The film focused on character development and a realistic narrative, distancing itself from the excesses of previous entries. In Casino Royale, we also saw an emotional side to Bond, not witnessed since on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which made him more relatable and less of a comic book character, which also resonated with the viewers, while still remaining true to Fleming's original design. Quantum of Solace, 2008, continued this grittier tone, with Bond driven by revenge. The film emphasised action and a darker storyline, exploring Bond's vulnerability and determination. Skyfall, 2012, blended personal and professional stakes, with a deeper exploration of Bond's past. Craig's Bond faced physical and emotional challenges, further humanising the character whilst delivering high-octane action. Spectre, 2015, and No Time to Die saw Bond dealing with the consequences of his past actions. Craig's portrayal evolved into a more reflective and mature character, emphasising themes of legacy and closure. These films balance personal drama with traditional Bond elements, bringing Craig's tenure to a nuanced, if not controversial, conclusion. Each actor has brought something unique to the role of James Bond, shaping the character to fit their times and their own personal style. Connery's classic suave, Lazenby's romanticism, Moore's humour, Dalton's grit, Brosnan's balance, and Craig's raw intensity collectively create a multifaceted legacy that continues to evolve. While Fleming's Bond was a cold, detached figure with a dark edge, the film portrayals have ranged from charming and sophisticated to brutal and emotionally complex, reflecting the changing audience expectations and cinematic trends all over the decades. I thought it would also be interesting to look at what age the actors were when they played Bond. The ages of the actors when they began and ended tenure as James Bond vary significantly. Sean Connery began his role as Bond at the age of 32 in Dr. No, 1962, and ended at 41 with Diamonds Are Forever. He returned briefly at 53 for the non-Eon film Never Say Never Again. George Lazenby was 29, the youngest of all the Bonds, when he starred in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Roger Moore started his tenure at 45 with Live and Let Die, older than Connery had been when he left the franchise, and he finished at 57 with A View to a Kill. Moore remains the oldest actor to play Bond, both at the start and end of his tenure. For the last few films, his age was becoming a bit of a joke, with his own physicality hindering the authenticity of the action, and the promiscuous relationships with women much younger than himself was, even in the 80s, becoming a little distasteful and awkward. Timothy Dalton was 41 when he debuted in The Living Daylights, 1987, and 43 in his final Bond outing, Licence to Kill, in 1989. Pierce Brosnan took on the role at 42 in GoldenEye, 1995, and concluded aged 49 with Die Another Day. Daniel Craig was 38 years old when he took the role of Bond in Casino Royale, 2006, and he finished his tenure at 53 with No Time to Die, the same age that Connery had been when he returned for his copycat Bond in Never Say Never Again. Of course, the journey to bring Bond to the screen and help keep him there for an incredible 7 decades hasn't been without difficulty or controversy. Fleming's novels, written in a different era, have faced criticism for outdated views, been highlighted for scrutiny for being misogynistic, racist, and the films have had to navigate these tricky waters, adapting Bond for modern sensibilities. Even movies as late in the day as Skyfall, 2012, faced backlash for its portrayal of the villain Raoul Silva, whose character is interpreted by some as perpetuating negative stereotypes about the LGBTQ individuals. Legal battles, such as those over the rights to Fundable, added drama behind the scenes for decades, affecting both the books and the films. And yet Bond has endured, adapting and thriving through the challenges, echoing the character's own adventures on the page or screen. The James Bond franchise is a testament to its enduring appeal, with every new film becoming a massive event, and speculation over each new Bond actor continuously reaches fever pitch. The Bond films have had a significant impact on popular culture, influencing everything from fashion to music. The theme songs for each film have become major hits, with artists like Shirley Bassey, Tom Jones, Paul McCartney, Tina Turner, Duran Duran, Carly Simon, Madonna, Jack White and Adele contributing to the franchise's musical legacy. These songs often capture the mood and style of the films, adding another layer to the Bond experience, and by using contemporary stars, it's a genius way to promote the movie in the run-up to the movie's release, and therefore keeping Bond current and relevant. So in this series, I hope that we will be reminded why we fell in love with James Bond 007 in the first place, the thrill of the chase, the danger of espionage, the allure of the unknown, and the timeless cool of a man who always has a plan and always enjoys a martini, shaken, not stirred. So join me now, and together we will journey back through the history of Bond, putting the pieces together and marking the character's evolution. In this series we will learn historical behind-the-scenes stories, as well as useless tidbits and factoids that film junkies like myself just love to lap up. So let's give it everything or nothing as we delve into the luxurious yet perilous world of Bond. James Bond. Now, I don't know about you, but James Bond, to me, always conjures up images from lazy days as a child in the 80s, stuck at home during the holiday season, back when everything shut for Christmas or Easter. Actually, even on a Sunday back in the 80s and early 90s, the UK would shut up in its entirety. It would be raining outside and we would be stuck in at home, and Bond would always be on. This is back when we only had 4 channels and just the 2 Bonds to choose from as well. Well, Lazenby had been thrown into the mix, although I cannot recall if this was something I was aware of until much later. To me, it didn't really matter which portrayal of Bond I was watching. It's the whole package with Bond. The adventures, the gadgets, the locations, the girls. However, it was the villains that were always my inroad to Bond as a child. I didn't care for the Bond girls or the espionage storylines back then, but if Knick Knack or Oddjob or especially Jaws was squaring up against our debonair hero, then I was there, glued to the screen. However, although I had seen 1 or 2 movies, I was never a massive fan, if I'm honest. I would never really watch a Bond film out of choice. In fact, it was purely because of the lack of choice on those lazy Sunday afternoons in front of the TV with only those 4 channels to choose from that would force me to sit through another Bond film. Usually there was something dull like the opera or darts as alternative viewing options. Bond was usually the best choice on offer that day. But that being said, I do remember sometimes being prone to being drawn in with the hype of a new Bond movie. I remember being one of the first to hire A View to a Kill and The Living Daylights on VHS from our video shops upon their release. I remember vividly the posters for both hanging in the shop window ahead of the due date and feeling that excitement and the importance of a new Bond release, even as a child with only a fleeting interest in the franchise. It's easy to get swept up in Bond fever. I didn't really take in John Barry's bombastic scores or Ken Adams' amazing production designs. I hadn't noticed that Felix Leiter was a recurring character. I wasn't taking notice of characters and plots at all, and I was certainly too young to really notice why fans of Bond hadn't taken to Dalton, which, having since read the books, I can see as a much closer characterisation of Fleming's Bond than Roger Moore's depiction wound up being. But audiences weren't ready for that change just yet. I really enjoyed the release of GoldenEye. In fact, GoldenEye's release would coincide with my taking film studies at college as well, and it had been selected to review and analyse as part of the curriculum. We looked at how it seemed to be a fresher look at the Bond in modern days. Its 2 Bond girls having far more meatier and feistier roles than usual, and M was now a woman too. Actually, that was a stroke of genius to me to stick Dame Judi Dench into that role, and a great acknowledgement of how times had changed and women's roles in society had evolved to become less second citizen and take on more prominent and significant roles in society. I also really enjoyed GoldenEye's follow-up, Tomorrow Never Dies, with Jonathan Pryce as the megalomaniac media mogul, borrowing just a hint from the world's current supervillain, Rupert Murdoch. It seemed a relevant and completely plausible plot. However, I walked out of the cinema when watching The World Is Not Enough because it seemed to have just fallen back into its usual parody of the Bond character. Bond as this irresistible superhuman, and watching intelligent female characters become quivering wrecks around him seemed so jarring already, so unbelievable, that it felt like a massive step backwards. The humour felt sillier, the stunts more preposterous. It was a shame and ultimately marked the end of the road of Bond for me, personally. I'd had enough of the same old. Besides, with my maturing taste in film, remember I was going to film studies, and the influence of my film studies courses, I was becoming a bit of a movie snob at this point, and was dropping various genre movies and certain actors left, right and centre. Bond was just another casualty of the time for me. I didn't even bat an eye when Casino Royale came out. The hype of a new, grittier Bond was totally wasted on me. But all that changed with the release of Skyfall in 2012. At the time, I had been reviewing films on an old YouTube channel that I ran and already looked at a handful of the films by director Sam Mendes. I'd started to take notice of the themes of family and parenthood which run through his movies, from American Beauty and Away We Go to Road to Perdition. I'd also begun to take a lot more interest in the cinematography of movies. And as an avid Coen Brothers fan, Roger Deakins was a cinematographer that I was in awe of. Those opening scenes of Wall-E, are just candy for the eyes. So when I heard that Sam Mendes was directing the latest Bond, with Deakins at his side as cinematographer, I was sold. Brought back into the Bond hype after a decades-long hiatus. I loved the film, watched it back to back, and then watched it some more. It's not just, in my humble opinion at least, the best Bond film, it's also a great film in general. I found Deakins' imagery lifted Bond to a whole new level, and it was fascinating how Mendes incorporated his themes of family influences into this long-running franchise. Well, obviously, I wanted to do a review for my YouTube channel there and then, but I hesitated. I felt that I hadn't really seen enough Bond to give it the review that it deserved. I needed to take a look at Bond from the past to see how Skyfall fit and advance the series. I hadn't seen a Bond film in over 12 years, so I ordered a few Bond DVDs, Goldfinger, GoldenEye, Live and Let Die. When they arrived, they were absolutely brilliant. The special features included in the DVDs was a really in-depth series of retrospective documentaries detailing that particular movie's production, from script development to the visionary excellence of Ken Adams' production designs. These documentaries focused on everything: the music, the casting, the location scouting, the stunt work, as well as focusing on each movie's relevance within the times and the subsequent evolution of the Bond franchise. I lapped up these special features. I had watched the films and the special features in no time, but now I had started something. I wanted more. I was, back then, and remain to be, somewhat of an obsessive. Once something gets its hooks into me, like a film series or an actor or director's work, I tend to take a deep breath and then plunge headfirst into it, absorbing every last drop and emerging somewhat enlightened on the other side months later. And Bond was about to become my newest obsession. Not only did this DVD series feed my appetite for behind-the-scenes film knowledge, but I also noticed that on the spine of each DVD was a slice of a larger image with a familiar shape. Didn't take me long to work out that this set had been printed to show the 007 logo, part numerals, part Walther PPK, in its entirety across the complete set. So now I knew what I had to do. I was going to need a bigger shelf. Over the coming weeks, I ordered 2 or 3 Bond movies a week, usually for as little as a couple of quid each, including postage. Adding to the collection each week, the logo slowly took on the shape on my shelf. I was gorging on the contents, fueling my inner geek and preparing for my Bond review, which I knew by now was already escalating into something much more than a simple review of Skyfall. At some point too, I realised that I had to go all in here, or not at all, and so I read all of Fleming's novels in order as well. And then I also read plenty of literature on both Fleming and Bond alike. Before long, I had gone from someone who had no interest in Bond to a professor of Bond overnight. Watching through the Bond films, I couldn't help feel that On Her Majesty's Secret Service still felt like kind of a misstep, as it had been perceived when it first came out in 1969. People were so used to Sean Connery's take on James Bond that the sudden change to George Lazenby threw everyone off kilter. Lazenby was an unknown actor, and while he did an okay job, he just couldn't fill Connery's shoes in the eyes of many fans. However, the tone of the movie was different, which I liked. It had a more serious and emotional storyline, especially with Bond falling in love and getting married. This was a big departure from the more light-hearted and gadget-filled adventures that people would come to love. It didn't help the movie's stunted box office results that Lazenby announced that he wouldn't be returning for another Bond film before this one had even hit the theatres, which probably made audiences less invested. But I also became aware of just how coveted this film has become over time, and it has now found its place as a cherished classic. People began to appreciate its unique qualities: the strong storyline, the beautiful alpine settings, and the intense action scenes. Diana Rigg's performance as Tracy was also a standout, bringing a depth to Bond's love interest in a way that hadn't been seen before. I now also finally understood the whole Timothy Dalton stumble too, although I can't help but feel that we were robbed of what could have proven to be an impressive series, especially when viewed through a modern lens. Dalton's Bond was much closer to Fleming's original vision, and I really enjoyed the plot of Licence to Kill, where Bond seeks vengeance for the near-fatal attack on CIA operative and Bond's greatest ally, Felix Leiter. With his licence revoked, Bond's new strategy is to destroy the gang from within, systematically pitting the villains against one another and allowing them to do the job for him. This, in the 80s, was too vast a shift in Bond's interpretation following the successful, yet cartoonish Bond that Moore had shaped. So I started to write this series for my YouTube channel. I uploaded a couple of videos to get the ball rolling, but then life kicked in, as it so often does, and my YouTube channel unfortunately took a back seat. I never did complete the series, so I guess I'm trying to complete my project here now, on the podcast rather than on the YouTubes. I've recently refreshed myself with the special features, begun looking at each movie, been rereading the novels. Well, actually I'm cheating a bit and listening to the audiobooks, but anyway, I digress, as I always do. For the time being, that's enough of my own experience with Bond. Now let's start in earnest our exploration of the most successful film franchises to hit the screens. Bond by now has been sewn into the very fabric of our society, even if you don't think it's that big a deal. It's just a movie after all, right? But most of you were probably there in your corner of the world on those same lazy Sunday afternoons as I was, watching Bond fight in free fall from a plane, or on top of a train, or even in outer space. You all grew up with Bond as a regular fixture as much as I did. Yet once upon a time, believe it or not, there was a time before Bond. A time before Bond. It's hard to think of that now, I know. Most of you have probably never even known such a time. It had already been well established by the time that I popped into existence, and for the best part of 20 years too. By now he even had his own history and backstory. James Bond, as created by Ian Fleming, is a British secret agent working for MI6, also known as the Secret Intelligence Service. Fleming's backstory for Bond is gradually revealed across his novels and provides a detailed and intriguing history. Bond was born on November 11th, 1920, to a Scottish father, Andrew Bond, and a Swiss mother, Monique Delacroix Bond. His parents' backgrounds gave Bond a sense of cultural duality and sophistication, which are integral to his character. When Bond was 11, his parents died in a climbing accident. As an orphan, Bond was sent to live with his aunt, Miss Charmaine Bond, in the village of Pet Bottom, where he attended Eton College. However, he was expelled from Eton after only 2 terms for repeated truancy and trouble with one of the boys' maids. Bond then went to Fettes College in Edinburgh, his father's old school. After his schooling, Bond attended the University of Geneva for a short period before joining the Ministry of Defence. During World War II, Bond joined the Royal Navy and was promoted to the rank of Commander, which he retained in his post-war career. His wartime experiences, particularly in his service in the Special Branch of the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, significantly shaped his skills and personality, making him a suitable candidate for the British Secret Service. Bond was recruited into MI6, where he earned his 00 status, which denotes a licence to kill. His first mission as a 00 agent involves the assassination of a Japanese cipher expert in New York and a Norwegian double agent in Stockholm, earning him the code number 007. Throughout Fleming's novels, Bond is depicted as a complex character, suave, sophisticated, and capable of great brutality when necessary. His personal life is marked by a sense of detachment and many vices, acting as a defence mechanism against the dangerous and often emotionally taxing nature of his work. But that doesn't alter the fact that there was a time before Bond, and in that time a child was born into the higher echelons of British society. Ian Lancaster Fleming was born on May 28, 1908. Born of a family of significant wealth and influence. His father, Valentine Fleming, was a Conservative Member of Parliament and a Major in the British Army, who died in action during World War I. Ian's mother, Evelyn St. Croix Rose, was known for her beauty and social connections, which ensured that the family maintained their high social standing after Valentine's death. She was a significant influence in Ian's life, often pushing him towards academic and social success, despite his more rebellious tendencies. Losing his father at a young age had a profound impact on Ian Fleming. Valentine Fleming was killed on the Western Front in 1917 when Ian was just 9 years old. This loss left a significant void in his life and created a sense of responsibility and expectation. Valentine was posthumously awarded Distinguished Service Order, and Winston Churchill personally wrote his obituary, highlighting the family's prominence and helping cement the heroic image of his father that Ian would carry on with him. The absence of his father placed considerable pressure on Ian. both emotionally and in terms of expectations. His mother, Evelyn, became the dominant force in his life, often driving him to excel and uphold the family's reputation. This pressure contributed to Ian's rebellious nature during his school years and his constant struggle to find his own identity and path. The loss also imbued him with a certain restlessness and a desire for adventure. Fleming's upbringing was marked by privilege but also by a series of personal challenges. He attended several prestigious schools, including Eton College and Sandhurst Military Academy. His time at Eton was marred by academic struggles and disciplinary issues, leading his mother to move him to a private tutor in Austria. These formative years were spent travelling through Europe, exposing him to diverse cultures and languages, which later influenced his writing. Despite the difficulties, Fleming's childhood experiences and the social circles that he moved in provided a rich background that would also go on to inform the world of Bond. Fleming's career saw him working as a journalist, stockbroker and even a naval intelligence officer during World War II, reaching the rank of lieutenant commander. It was his wartime experiences that provided rich fodder for the espionage and adventure that would characterise the Bond series. During World War II, Ian Fleming's contributions were significant and had a lasting impact on his career. Fleming's role as a naval intelligence officer placed him at the heart of numerous critical operations and exposed him to the world of espionage. One of the most monumental events during Fleming's wartime service was his involvement in the planning and execution of Operation GoldenEye. This was a contingency plan for maintaining communication with Gibraltar in case Spain joined the Axis powers. Fleming's role demonstrated his strategic thinking and deep understanding of intelligence operations, skills that he later imbued in his fictional character. Fleming later named his Jamaican estate GoldenEye, and much later still it would become the title of the 1995 Bond movie. Another significant operation Fleming contributed to was Operation Mincemeat, a deception strategy aimed at misleading the Axis powers about the Allies' invasion plans. Fleming's imaginative and bold ideas for such operations showcased his innovative approach to intelligence work. His experience in these high-stakes environments provided him with a wealth of knowledge and anecdotes. This life in intelligence not only informed the thrilling, intricate plots of his books, but also lent an air of authenticity to the world of espionage that he so vividly depicted. Ian Fleming's lifestyle was marked by luxury, indulgence, and a penchant for the finer things in life. Much like his iconic creation, Fleming's taste in food, drink, gambling, and women was sophisticated and extravagant, reflecting both his personal preferences and his social status. Fleming was known for his discerning palate and enjoyed gourmet cuisine. He often dined at some of the finest restaurants and relished elaborate meals. His favourite dishes included rich, well-prepared foods like grilled sole, scrambled eggs and various seafood delicacies. He had a particular fondness for caviar and champagne, staples in Bond's adventures. In terms of drink, Fleming was a connoisseur. He favoured martinis, especially the Vesper martini, which he invented himself and which he famously introduced in his first Bond novel, Casino Royale. This cocktail, made with gin, vodka and Quina Lillet, reflected Fleming's sophistication and somewhat hedonistic approach to life. He also enjoyed bourbon and whiskey, often partaking in these drinks during his writing sessions. Fleming's affinity for gambling was well known. He spent considerable time in casinos, particularly those in Monte Carlo. He enjoyed the thrill and strategy involved in games like baccarat and roulette. His experience in these glamorous settings provided rich material for his novels, in which he captured the tension and allure of high-stakes gambling. When it came to women, Fleming had a complex and often tumultuous romantic life. He had numerous relationships and was known for his charm and charisma. His affairs were often with intelligent, beautiful and independent women, mirroring the Bond girl archetype. One of his most significant relationships was with Muriel Wright, a beautiful and accomplished woman who worked as a model and an ambulance driver. Muriel Wright was tragically killed in March 1944 when a German bomb hit her London apartment during an air raid. This loss had a profound effect on Fleming. He was deeply affected by her death, as he had a genuine affection for her. Untimely death during the Blitz had a personal dimension to Fleming's wartime experiences and gave him more emotional turmoil to mine for his writing. The tragedy of losing someone close to him in such a violent and sudden manner contributed to the sense of vulnerability that occasionally surfaces in his portrayal of Bond's relationships with women, especially that of Vesper in Casino Royale, whose death resonated and resurfaced as the books continued, as with the Daniel Craig films. Fleming's personal experiences of love and loss during the war years thus inform the complexity and human elements of the characters that would surface in his novels, making them more relatable and real. But still, that didn't stop him from looking at women in general through jaded, misogynistic eyes of 50s Britain. I recall in one of the novels Bond being more scared whilst being driven in a car by a woman than at any point in his perilous work. It's laughable today, but a lot of Fleming's prejudice and outdated social viewpoints would be a prominent feature in the books.